Imagine you're at a party. Everyone around you is laughing, dancing, seemingly lost in the moment. But you're noticing the forced quality of some conversations. You're thinking about the environmental impact of all those plastic cups. You're analyzing the social dynamics playing out in real time. And you're wondering why you can't just turn off your brain and enjoy yourself. If this sounds familiar, you're not alone. And here's the counterintuitive truth that research keeps confirming. Higher intelligence is often associated with lower life satisfaction. Not always, but far more often than we'd expect. Psychologist Ruth Karpinski at Pitzer College conducted a study of over 3,800 members of Mensa, the High IQ Society. She found that highly intelligent individuals had significantly higher rates of anxiety, depression, and other mood disorders compared to the general population. We're not talking about a small difference. The rates were substantially elevated across multiple categories. This isn't what we're told to expect. We assume intelligence should make life easier, better problem solving, more opportunities, deeper understanding. So why does the data suggest the opposite? Why do so many brilliant minds struggle with unhappiness? The answer is more complex and more interesting than you might think. And understanding it might be the key to breaking free from patterns that have been holding you back. This phenomenon has been observed across multiple research domains. Psychologist Edward de Bono, known for his work on thinking processes, has written extensively about what he calls intelligence traps. These are patterns of thinking that intelligent people fall into precisely because of their cognitive abilities. Evolutionary psychologist Satoshi Kanazawa at the London School of Economics has studied the relationship between intelligence and happiness. His research suggests that highly intelligent individuals often find themselves at odds with their evolutionary programming. Their cognitive abilities create expectations and perspectives that conflict with the emotional systems we inherited from our ancestors. Philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer wrote about this in the 1800s. He observed that the person of intellect will, as a rule, be interested in the world of phenomena and in reflecting on it, while the ordinary person will be interested only in his own personal affairs. He understood that intelligence changes not just what you can do, but how you experience reality itself. More recently, psychologist Adam Perkins at King's College London has researched the connection between intelligence and anxiety. His work shows that intelligent people are more likely to engage in what's called sentinel intelligence. They're constantly scanning for threats and problems, which served an evolutionary purpose, but creates chronic stress in modern life. These researchers are pointing to something crucial. Intelligence isn't just a tool you use. It fundamentally shapes how you perceive and interact with the world. And that comes with costs we rarely acknowledge. So here's what we're going to explore. First, I'll show you the 5 specific ways that high intelligence actually creates suffering. Not because something's wrong with you, but because of how your mind naturally operates. Then we'll dig into the evolutionary and psychological mechanisms that explain why this happens. But here's the most important part. We'll walk through practical strategies that work specifically for analytical minds. Not generic happiness advice, but approaches designed for people who think deeply and critically. By the end, you'll understand how to leverage your intelligence for well-being instead of letting it work against you. Let's start by understanding the specific patterns that might be running in your own mind. So what exactly happens in an intelligent mind that creates unhappiness? Let's break this down into 5 core patterns. First, there's the analysis paralysis problem. Your ability to see multiple perspectives and outcomes becomes a burden. You can envision dozens of potential futures, weigh countless variables, and anticipate numerous consequences. This sounds like an advantage. But when it comes to decision-making and action, it often leads to paralysis. Should you take that job? Your mind immediately generates scenarios. The growth potential versus the risk. The cultural fit versus the compensation. The impact on relationships versus the career trajectory. each consideration spawns more considerations. Meanwhile, someone with less analytical capacity simply makes the decision and moves forward. They don't suffer from the weight of all those possible futures. Research by psychologist Barry Schwartz on what he calls the paradox of choice shows that more options decrease satisfaction. Intelligent people don't just have more external options. They generate more internal options through their ability to imagine alternatives. Every choice becomes heavier. Second, there's what we might call meaning deficit disorder. Intelligent people are often driven by a need for meaning and purpose. Simple pleasures don't satisfy in the same way. You can't just enjoy a nice meal without thinking about the experience of enjoyment itself. You can't just do work for a paycheck without questioning whether it contributes to something meaningful. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's research on flow states shows that intelligent people need complex challenges to feel engaged. But modern life often involves routine tasks, social obligations, and maintenance activities that feel meaningless. The gap between what engages your mind and what fills your days creates chronic dissatisfaction. Third, there's the social disconnection pattern. Intelligence is normally distributed. If you're in the top 2%, that means 98% of people you encounter think differently than you do. Not better or worse, just differently. They process information at different speeds. They find interest in different things. They prioritize differently. This creates genuine communication challenges. Psychologist Leda Hollingworth studied highly gifted individuals in the 1940s and identified what she called the communication range. She found that optimal communication happens between people within about 30 IQ points of each other. Beyond that gap, misunderstandings multiply and connection becomes harder. You might find yourself constantly adjusting your communication, simplifying your thoughts, holding back observations that others might find weird or intense. Over time, this creates a sense of isolation even when you're surrounded by people. You feel fundamentally unseen because you're constantly translating yourself. Fourth, there's the existential awareness burden. Intelligence correlates with the ability to think abstractly. And abstract thinking inevitably leads to existential questions. The nature of consciousness, the inevitability of death, the apparent meaninglessness of the universe, the constructedness of social reality. Most people don't spend much time thinking about these things. They're absorbed in immediate concerns and experiences. But if you're intelligent, these questions intrude. You can't just accept comfortable narratives. You see through them. And what lies beyond those narratives is often uncomfortable. Philosopher Albert Camus wrote about this as the absurd, the confrontation between human need for meaning and the apparent meaninglessness of the universe. Intelligent people face this confrontation more directly and more frequently, and there's no easy resolution. Finally, there's perfectionism and the critic's curse. Your ability to see flaws is heightened. You notice logical inconsistencies, poor reasoning, inefficiencies, and problems that others miss. This makes you good at analysis and critique, but it also means you apply that same critical lens to yourself. You see the gap between what you've achieved and what you could achieve. You notice your own inconsistencies and failures. You hold yourself to standards that are often unrealistic because you can envision ideal versions of yourself and your work. Research by psychologists Randy Frost and Gordon Flett shows that perfectionism, especially self-oriented perfectionism, is strongly associated with depression and anxiety. These 5 patterns interact and reinforce each other. The social disconnection increases existential awareness because you're alone with your thoughts more. The analysis paralysis creates more material for self-criticism. The meaning deficit makes perfectionism more painful because even achievements feel hollow. The result? A mind that's capable of extraordinary things, but often working against its own well-being. But why does intelligence create these patterns? What's happening at a deeper level? Let's start with evolutionary psychology. Your brain evolved in environments radically different from modern life. Psychologist Satoshi Kanazawa's Savannah IQ interaction hypothesis suggests that more intelligent individuals are better able to comprehend and adapt to evolutionarily novel situations. But they also struggle more with situations where evolutionary adaptations still matter. What does this mean practically? Your ancestors evolved to live in small tribes of maybe 150 people. Strong social bonds, clear purpose, immediate feedback between actions and consequences, physical challenges, real threats, and real safety. Their happiness came from things that served survival and reproduction. Fast forward to today. You're dealing with abstract work, digital relationships, delayed gratification, complex social systems. None of this is what your emotional systems were designed for. And intelligence makes you more aware of this mismatch. You can see that the things evolution makes you crave don't align with what actually creates well-being in modern contexts. Here's a specific example. Your brain releases dopamine when you anticipate rewards. This worked great when rewards were things like finding food or connecting with tribe members. But now your brain is giving you the same dopamine hit for checking social media or refreshing email. Intelligent people can recognize this hijacking intellectually. They know it's not serving them. But knowing doesn't stop the emotional response. This creates what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, holding two conflicting pieces of information simultaneously. Now let's talk about cognitive processing and rumination. Psychologist Susan Nolan Hoeksema's research on rumination shows that repetitive thinking about problems is a major risk factor for depression. And intelligent people are natural ruminators. Your mind is good at analysis, so it keeps analyzing. Long after analysis is useful, you replay conversations, examining what you said and what you could have said. You analyze failures, looking for lessons and patterns. You think about problems from multiple angles, searching for solutions. This is your mind doing what it does well. But there's no off switch. The same capacity that helps you solve problems keeps running even when there's no problem to solve, or when further analysis won't help. Neuroscientist Susan Cain, in her work on introversion and sensitivity, points out that many intelligent people have what's called high sensory processing sensitivity. Your brain doesn't just process more information, it processes it more deeply. You notice subtleties others miss. Environmental stimuli affect you more. Emotional experiences hit harder. This depth of processing is part of what enables insight and understanding, but it's also exhausting and overwhelming. Then there's the metacognition trap. Metacognition means thinking about thinking. It's awareness of your own thought processes. Intelligent people tend to be highly metacognitive. You don't just feel anxious, you think about why you're anxious. You analyze your own reactions, you question your own motivations. This sounds helpful, and sometimes it is, but it often creates additional layers of suffering. You're not just experiencing an emotion, you're judging yourself for having that emotion. You're not just thinking, you're critiquing how you're thinking. Psychologist Paul Gilbert's work on self-criticism shows that this internal critique system, while intended to help us improve, often creates shame and rumination that prevent actual change. Philosopher and psychologist William James distinguished between what he called the I and the me. The I is the experiencing self. The me is the self as object, the self you think about. Intelligent people spend more time as the me, observing and analyzing themselves. This creates distance from direct experience and can make genuine presence and joy harder to access. Finally, there's what we might call the curse of simulation. Your intelligence allows you to mentally simulate scenarios. You can imagine how a conversation might go, how a project might unfold, how your life might develop. This is useful for planning, but it also means you spend enormous amounts of time in simulated realities instead of actual reality. Research by psychologist Daniel Gilbert on effective forecasting shows that we're terrible at predicting what will make us happy. But intelligent people, confident in their analytical abilities, keep trying to figure it out mentally. They simulate and plan and optimize. Meanwhile, life is happening. And the simulated version is always different from the lived version. The root cause comes down to this. Intelligence is a tool that evolved for specific purposes: problem solving, pattern recognition, planning, social navigation. But when that tool runs constantly, when it turns on itself and on questions that don't have clear answers, it creates suffering. You have a Formula One racing car engine, but you're stuck in traffic. The power that could propel you forward instead just generates heat and noise. So how do you actually work with an intelligent mind instead of being tormented by it? Not by becoming less intelligent, but by developing specific skills and practices. First, practice what psychologist Ellen Langer calls sideways attention. This means directing your analytical powers deliberately rather than letting them run on autopilot. When you notice rumination starting, consciously shift to observation mode. Instead of analyzing why you're anxious, simply observe the physical sensations of anxiety. Where do you feel it in your body? How does it change moment to moment? This isn't suppression, it's redirection. You're still using your capacity for close attention, but you're pointing it somewhere more productive. Research shows that this kind of embodied awareness reduces rumination more effectively than trying to think your way out of difficult emotions. Create what researcher Cal Newport calls thinking protocols. These are specific times and contexts for deep analysis. Maybe it's 30 minutes in the morning with coffee and a notebook. During that time, analyze all you want. Work through problems, examine situations. But outside that window, practice catching the analytical mind and gently redirecting it. This creates boundaries around a process that otherwise runs constantly. Second, deliberately cultivate what philosopher Hubert Dreyfus called absorbed coping. This is the state of being fully engaged in an activity without self-reflection. For intelligent people, this is harder to access, but also more necessary. Find activities that demand enough attention that your mind can't wander, but don't require abstract thinking. This varies by person. Rock climbing, playing music, cooking a complex recipe, working with your hands. The key is that it needs to be challenging enough to keep you present, but not so challenging that you can step back and analyze. Research by psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi on flow states shows that these experiences of absorption are among the most satisfying human experiences. But intelligent people often avoid activities where they're not immediately excellent. Challenge yourself to be a beginner at something. Let your mind struggle with the basics instead of analyzing the meta level. Third, develop what psychologist Kristin Neff calls common humanity awareness. When you're suffering, your intelligent mind wants to figure out why. What's wrong with you? How can you fix it? But suffering isn't a problem to solve. It's part of being human. Practice this specific reframe. I'm struggling right now, and struggle is part of the human experience. Everyone struggles. My intelligence doesn't exempt me from this. Research shows that recognizing suffering as universal rather than personal reduces shame and self-criticism. Connect with others specifically around struggle, not around strengths. Intelligent people often connect through ideas and competence. Try connecting through vulnerability instead. Find people you can be honest with about your difficulties, not to solve them, but to acknowledge them. This reduces the isolation that amplifies unhappiness. Fourth, implement what researcher Anders Ericsson called deliberate rest. Just as elite athletes need recovery time, elite thinkers need mental recovery. But intelligent people often feel guilty about rest. Your mind says you should be productive. learning. Improving. Schedule non-negotiable rest periods. During these times, engage in activities that are genuinely restorative, not just different forms of stimulation. This means not reading, not listening to educational podcasts, not analyzing. It means walking without solving problems, sitting without planning, being without becoming. Research by psychologist Aaron Westgate on boredom shows that intelligent people have lower tolerance for unstimulating environments. They need more input to feel engaged. But this constant need for stimulation prevents the kind of mental rest that allows creativity and insight to emerge. Practice tolerating boredom in small doses. Let your mind idle. Fifth, use your intelligence to build better systems instead of solving the same problems repeatedly. This is where your analytical abilities become an asset. When you notice a pattern of difficulty, don't just manage the symptoms. Engineer a solution. If social events drain you, design your social life intentionally. Maybe it's smaller gatherings, one-on-one conversations, or time-limited interactions. If decision-making creates paralysis, create decision frameworks in advance. If perfectionism stops you from starting projects, implement done is better than perfect rules. Author and entrepreneur Tim Ferriss talks about meta-learning, learning how to learn. Apply that same approach to well-being. Study yourself. What patterns do you notice? What contexts support you? What drains you? Then build systems that play to your strengths and protect against your vulnerabilities. Sixth, practice what psychologist Rick Hanson calls taking in the good. Your intelligent mind is biased toward problems. It notices what's wrong because that's evolutionarily useful. But this means positive experiences wash over you while negative ones stick. When something good happens, even something small, pause. Let yourself actually experience it for 10 to 20 seconds. Notice how it feels. Where do you feel it in your body? What thoughts arise? This isn't toxic positivity. It's counteracting a real bias in how your mind processes experience. Research in neuroscience shows that experiences need to be held in awareness for several seconds to transfer from short-term buffers to long-term storage. By deliberately attending to positive experiences, you're not ignoring problems. You're creating balance in what your brain encodes and remembers. Seventh, embrace what philosopher Nassim Taleb calls intellectual humility. Your intelligence can create the illusion that you should be able to figure everything out, that if you just think hard enough, you'll find the answer. But some questions don't have answers. Some problems don't have solutions. Practice saying, "I don't know," more often. To yourself and others. Practice holding uncertainty without trying to resolve it immediately. This is uncomfortable for analytical minds. The discomfort is part of the practice. Read philosophy and literature that embraces paradox and ambiguity. Existentialist philosophers like Camus and Sartre, poets like Rilke, who wrote about living the questions. This isn't giving up on understanding. It's understanding that not everything can be understood, and that's okay. Finally, consider what psychologist Sean Achor calls the happiness advantage. We usually think we'll be happy after we achieve something, get the degree, land the job, solve the problem. But research shows this is backwards. Happiness leads to success more reliably than success leads to happiness. For intelligent people, this is particularly relevant. You're probably good at delayed gratification. You can sacrifice present enjoyment for future goals. But if you're always living for the future, you never actually arrive. Your intelligence can help you here too. Run the numbers. Calculate how much time you're spending in pursuit versus enjoyment. Would a company invest 95% in growth and 5% in profit? That's what you're doing when you neglect present well-being for future achievement. Here's what this all comes down to. Your intelligence isn't a flaw. It's not making you unhappy because something's wrong with you. It's creating specific challenges because of how human minds work and how our modern world is structured. The same qualities that make you insightful can make you miserable if you don't understand how to work with them. The analysis that helps you solve problems can trap you in rumination. The pattern recognition that reveals truth can make you cynical. The depth of processing that enables understanding can overwhelm you with stimulation. But here's the empowering truth. You have the capacity to understand these patterns and intervene in them. You can learn to direct your attention deliberately. You can build systems that work with your mind instead of against it. You can find people and contexts where your intelligence enhances connection rather than creating isolation. This isn't about becoming a different person. It's about understanding the person you are and creating conditions where you can thrive. Your intelligence is a gift, but like any powerful tool, it requires skill to use well. Start with one practice from what we've discussed. Maybe it's scheduled thinking time to contain rumination. Maybe it's an absorbed activity where you practice being present. Maybe it's deliberately connecting with someone around struggle rather than competence. Pick one thing. Notice what shifts. And here's the question I want to leave you with. What becomes possible when you stop fighting against your own mind and instead learn to work with it skillfully? What would it feel like to use your intelligence not to solve the problem of your unhappiness, but to create conditions where happiness can naturally emerge? You don't need to think your way to happiness. You need to think your way to better systems, better practices, and better understanding of how your particular mind works. And that's exactly the kind of challenge an intelligent mind is built for. The answer isn't less thinking. It's better thinking about what actually matters.